Okay. Good evening. I'm going to call to order this evening's council work session for November 12th, 2014. And would the councilors please introduce themselves, starting with Councilor Bennett.
Thank you. Chuck Bennett, Councilor Ward 1.
Brad Namke, Councilor Ward 3.
Bruce Councilor Ward 4.
Bruce Rogers, Ward 6.
Warren Benars, Ward 7.
Thanks, and I'm Mayor Anna Peterson. All right, I believe we have some information coming to us from our city manager, Linda
That's
Norris.
right. And what we'd like to do this evening is to talk about kind of high-level budget policy. So we have a process we'd like to walk through. I appreciate you being here. We have, I think, 3 members right now of the citizen members of the Budget Committee. So also appreciate you being here, and then we have some councilor-elects. So I'm glad to see this many people in the audience, and then of course the department heads, the municipal court judge, and other staff from the budget office. So what we'd like to do tonight, the first thing is this isn't a financial forecast. We do the forecast toward the end of the year, and we'll be presenting that to council in late January. We do it at that time of the year because we find that we have better information at that point, because we've gone through, we know what our property tax revenue is going to be for this year, and we're on our way with some other revenue for the city. What we wanted to discuss last night is how the general fund looks with the information we have right now. As I've shared with the council, the wonderful news, and for the budget committee members, is that we are starting to come out of compression. We're not out of the woods yet, and we will show you a graph that shows where we are with compression. In 1 year, it's made a pretty significant change, so I'm really excited about that. It's important to know we're not at the point where, that doesn't mean that we can add services back or anything at this point, but we probably won't have to cut next year. That's what I'm hoping for, and maybe can push those decisions out a little farther, and maybe they won't be as severe as we had originally anticipated. We'll know more about that in January when we have the financial forecast. I think it's important to remember at this time of year that we're making predictions now on where we think revenue and expenditures will be by July of 2016. So this is looking pretty far ahead. Before we go, or before I turn it over to you for a minute, I want to talk about the goal is that this is provide a backdrop for next year's budget, have a discussion, and begin to set some high-level policy direction to guide next year's budget recommendation. So before we go any further, I wanted for the mayor and council, are there other goals that you have for the meeting tonight? Or what would you like to accomplish? And Mayor, do you have, I'm sorry, that was bad timing.
Thank you very much. I'm just pleased that we have this opportunity to come together as early as we are, so that we can begin to truly get a grasp on the work that's going to be starting truly in January with the Budget Committee and
Yes.
moving forward. I'm pleased about the information about compression, but I'm also mindful that we've been able to run a really steady ship and have a really strong bond rating, in fact an increase, because of very careful fiscal management. So I appreciate that the city manager did say that looks like we're coming out of compression, but I am mindful that this is not going to be a year, I don't think, to be adding things in, but we'll just be able to keep what we're doing on a really strong, steady course.
Right.
Other councilors, comments? Councilor Benars?
I too would express that issue of, I'm looking forward to understanding a little bit more about, I understand compression, but a little bit more of where we're headed with it, forecasting as best we can. And I understand you've got different scenarios in here that we're looking for. I'm still looking, as I left the budget with the last year, I'm still trying to figure out how to get another $1 million towards street maintenance, which we've been not putting anything towards at this point. We've been doing repair work as it's been deemed necessary, but that was something that I left last year's budget with that I'm hoping we can look into this year. Part of this will answer that question, just getting prepared for the new budget cycle.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah.
All right, Councilor Rogers.
I won't get on a soap opera, but if we have extra funds, I would hope that we would look at projects that were one-time expenses,
Yes.
like community parks, that we could do a park without a aggressive master plan, but just do something. And and I agree with the sidewalks and streets, individual projects, but not a continuing project, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, and I think that's likely where our opportunities will be, is perhaps some additional one-time money for some projects. And we'll talk more about that and about the criteria you would like us to use to make those recommendations as we go.
All right, I think we'll
Okay,
just
any other
start in.
comments?
All right.
Okay, good. So first, I want to just go over the timeline. In November, we're doing the high-level policy discussion. In December, I'll give my initial direction to departments regarding internal rates, budget targets, and priorities. And they'll begin working on their budget, and some are already starting to work on aspects of their budget. In January, we'll have the financial forecast, and then, based on council's direction, the final budget targets for departments. February, departments prepare their last budget recommendations to me. In March, the budget office and the city manager's office review the recommendations and provide any additional direction as we see if we need to balance needs from departments, if one has greater or more urgent needs and we have to cut someplace else or recommend cutting. And then the budget office puts all of that material together as a draft budget. In April and May, our budget committee meetings are held. And then at the end of May, pass on their recommendations to the City Council and the Urban Renewal Agency Board. And then in June, as you know, both entities, the Council and the Urban Renewal Agency Board, make their, conduct public hearings and then make the final decisions regarding the following year's budget. So I always tell staff, it's like at this time of year, we look down and we look up and it's summer again. So yes, this is a pretty intense process, along with everything else we do to keep the city running. So this is very informal, as you can see from the charts. What we know now about the budget is the general fund working capital is about 1.4 million more than we expected at this point of the 2014-15 budget development. Or what we expected in February of last year. And I can tell you more about that. Property tax revenue is likely to be higher than in our last forecast, so we'll be able to project, I think, a little additional property tax revenue going out. In Marion County, we're beginning to come out of compression. In Polk County, the real market values and assessed values were 5% and 3.6% higher than anticipated, which is wonderful, and we'll give you more detailed information about that. Although, you know, property tax is about half of our general fund revenue, we still have the other half of the revenue. And unfortunately, the other revenue sources continue to be fairly flat. We're not expecting much increase in the other revenue sources. So even though we have a gain in property tax revenue, it doesn't go up that much overall in the general fund because we have other flat revenue sources. We know that our labor-related expenses will be higher next year. We've been negotiating with our unions, and as council knows, we're still negotiating with 3 unions at this time. Former financial forecast predicted a 1% pay raise to all unions each year as a market adjustment over the 5-year forecast. Other cities are giving between 2 and 3% increases, so we know that's not going to keep up with market. And so when we give you the financial forecast, we'll try to be a little more in line with what we think the market is going to be, so that we're not distorting what our labor costs will be. What I'd like to do now, and you have some sheets in front of you, but I'd like to ask David Lacey from our finance department, who's done some wonderful in-depth work on property tax, to go over his presentation with you and give you an opportunity to see what's changing and ask any questions you have about how property tax is going to be working.
Always fighting the microphone, sorry.
It's okay. They're hard to adjust.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm David Lacey from Administrative Services, and I'm here tonight to just give us an update on property taxes. And we've generally done this through the Finance Committee. These are generally pretty data-heavy presentations, so I'll try and make this as interesting as possible, as much as you can with property taxes. But I first off wanted to thank some folks that really help us with a lot of our data. Van Q from the Marion County Assessor's Office, who provides us with a lot of the data sets that help us then load our model, and so we can start looking at forecasts. And then also Travis Smith from our GIS department, who's helped us really get to the visuals of being able to map compression and see what those look like. So to start off, I just want to go over some definitions that will help us understand what we're seeing with property taxes. These will probably be reviewed to some of you, but I wanted to talk about real market value, and any of you are familiar with your tax bill, this is one of the things that you see on it. Real market value is defined as typically the price you would sell your property for in a transaction between two willing buyers as of January 1st of the assessment year. And Measure 5 limits the taxes that can be imposed on individual properties to $10 per thousand for government and $5 per thousand for schools based on real market value. And of course, bonds are excluded from that. The other section of it is assessed value, and we're going to talk mostly about maximum assessed value today. Measure 50 established limits on the taxes that can be imposed, and also permanent rates for Salem, $5.83 per thousand assessed. And the annual growth of the maximum assessed value, which is in general only 3%. Now there are some reasons that could go higher, like if there's any improvements to the property or if there's any sort of changes to zoning and things like that, but for the most part, 3%. Max assessed value is calculated by taking the greater of 103% of the prior year's assessed value or 100% of the prior year's max assessed value. And that gets a little confusing, but as we go through the presentation, you'll see how that interplay works a little bit today. So in times where we have real market value fall below assessed value, real market value then becomes the rate that the taxes are calculated on. It becomes the assessed value when it drops below there. And by statute, assessed value is defined as the lesser of real market value or maximum assessed value. So this graph gives you an idea of real market value for the Salem combined area of Marion and Polk counties versus the assessed value. You can see for the last few years, real market value is growing at a fairly accelerated clip and then declined. So, and you can see the dashed line, which represents the assessed value, was growing along fairly well and started to flatten out in the last few years before making a little bit of an uptick this year. So you can see how close those two are starting to get to each other. So when we look at real market value, this chart gives us kind of a look at, by property class, the last 3 years that we have data for at this point. So in fiscal year 2012-13, you can see we had about a 7.78% decline in residential value. We had about a 1% increase in 13-14. And then you can see a very dramatic increase in residential property for 14-15 at 11.4%. Overall, what that looks like is the bottom line in the total there. It went down about 4% in 12-13, was up just a little bit above zero in 13-14, and then fairly substantially altogether at about 5.58% in this year.
And
This chart
again, that's real market value.
That's
It's not
real
what we
market value.
assess property tax.
Right, so that goes back to that value that, between that sale of what a property would look like, what they're trying to get to. This chart gives us a look at assessed value, and you can kind of see how this works a little bit differently. You're not seeing as big of negative declines in this strictly because the law still allows that to keep increasing as long as there's a difference between real market value and assessed. But we were at about 1% growth in 12-13, about 1.79% in 13-14, and then overall about 3.86% in 14-15. So definitely a big increase this year, and also above that 3% that we normally see. So the other part of this that goes into real market value and assessed value is property tax compression loss. And we talk a whole lot about compression, but I don't know if we ever really do a great job of explaining that. So I want to just kind of go through some examples with compression to kind of show how that works and why it has been a problem here in Salem. So Measure 5 established that $10 government rate limit per thousand, which we talked about earlier, of real market value for each property. So once the tax rate's applied to the assessed value, the amount is tested against that Measure 5 limit. And if that assessed value exceeds the limit, that amount is reduced over all the taxing districts. So for Salem, Marion County, the current government rate is $10.51. So what this tells us is since that's over that $10 real market value cap, we have a potential issue for compression in Marion County. For Polk County, you can see that overall rate's $9.25. So in that case, since it's below the $10 test, we don't have a compression issue in Polk County. So that's kind of held true through this recession. So how does this work? Well, here's an example of two houses that the only difference between these two is they have a little bit different real market value. So in house number 1, there's a real market value of $200,000 versus house number 2 at $190,000. They're both assessed at $190,000. So the Measure 5 limit there would be $2,000 for house 1 and $1,900 for house 2. So as you work on calculating the rate with the Marion County rate, the tax amount on both of those based on assessed value would be $1,997.62. Since house number 2 has a maximum Measure 5 limit of $1,900, that house is actually compressed. That $97.62 is then lost, and that homeowner would be paying $1,900 versus house number 1 who's paying $1,997. And how does that work out with the taxing districts? Well, if you look at the houses here, house 1 still is paying that full share. You can see for Marion County, it'd be $543.95. House 2, as that's compressed, we'd only be paying the county $517.37. And you can see for the city, too, we would have $1,052 for house 1, but then that gets reduced to about $1,000 for house 2, and it goes all the way down through the different urban renewal districts, transit district, and things, too. So that compression spread based on what the tax rate is for each of the taxing districts. So what does that $97 look like when it's rolled up? Well, this is where we've had the compression issues that we have. So you can see the total for 12-13, we had a little over $1.1 million in compression loss for the city. Residential made up about $720,000 of that. In 13-14, it went down slightly, so just a little over $1 million. And then you can see the dramatic change in 14-15, where it went down to about $691,000. And you can see the biggest decrease is with residential. It went from $759,000 to $295,000. So definitely a big change in the largest property class. So this is a map we included with last January's financial forecast. The red on this map indicates properties that were experiencing some form of compression. And you could see it was fairly large. It was fairly spread out throughout the city. Now we'll take a look at what it looks like this year. You can see there's a dramatic decrease in red on the map as I kind of flip back and forth here. And again, this is a neighborhood by neighborhood thing. There's different scenarios that go into whether a house is still in compression or not, but you can see there's a dramatic difference in how many properties are out of compression at this point. And to try and give a little bit different visual, this map, the green is showing properties that came out of compression versus the red, but it gets a little hard to see. But that just gives you an idea of that same area that we were looking at.
And we don't have Polk County numbers yet, right? That's why West Salem isn't shown.
Yeah, and also there's no compression in Polk County, so we've leave that off the map at this point. But yeah, that's the majority of the issue is in Marion County at this point. So.
Darker, less darker.
So now if you'd refer to the handout that we gave with the 3 examples, I wanted to give you an idea of what 3 real properties look like in Salem and how each of them reacted differently. This screen kind of gives us a general idea of what's going on with each of these examples so we can talk through them. So example 1 is a home that was built in 1954. It was about 1,800 square feet. It's in southeast Salem near Madrona. This house has received a 3% tax increase during the time that we have modeled at this point. There was always an adequate spread between real market value and assessed value, so there was no compression. And then the AV and max assessed value remain the same in this case. And we'll go through this example, but I just wanted to kind of talk about them briefly. Example 2 is a home that's about 1,500 square feet, built in 1995, and it's near Battle Creek. It's going to receive a 9.7% tax increase this year. And in this case, real market value fell below assessed value. There was compression, and the max assessed value calculation was triggered this year as assessed value followed the decrease in real market value and then went up again. And then example 3 is a house that was built in 1996 near Hoodview Park, and it's going to receive a 15.7% tax rate increase this year. Again, real market value fell below assessed value, compression occurred, and then we had a calculation where it went up fairly heavily this year. So let's go ahead and walk through the examples. And I know these graphs get a little messy, but I'll try and walk through these as much
And
as I can.
because these numbers are so small, we have those pages in front of
Yeah.
you.
So if you can see, we'll concentrate first on the lines. The dark blue line indicates real market value. So for this property, it was moving along. You can see it slowed here in 13-14, but then real market value continues to grow through our forecast period. The numbers down here represent that. There was about a 3.1% increase between 11-12 and 12-13, a slight increase in 13-14, and then they had about a 4% increase in real market value in 14-15. So what that did, as we go down here, the maximum assessed value and the assessed value remain the same. They had 3% growth through this, and we're still forecasting that to be 3%. There was no compression in this property because there was enough of a spread between the real market value and assessed value that none of that went into compression. And you can see the City of Salem tax portion that was received continued to increase at about 3%. So example 2 gets into a little bit more of a mess there than the graph, so you can kind of see what was going on with this property. So this is a property where real market value was about $191,000 in 2011-12, went down 7.2% in 12-13 to $177,000, made a slight recovery in 13-14 to $180,000. But what happened here is when that decrease happened in 12-13, market value and assessed value all of a sudden became the same. And so the value that was assessed, this house was assessed at was $177,000. With max assessed value, what happened here is it's allowed to increase one more time to that 103% of the prior year's assessed value, but then it stays flat here until something happens. So we can see that's represented by this gray line that is just sort of flat, but that's not anything that's going on. Because of the way the calculation works, real market value becomes assessed value when it drops below. So this house all of a sudden had assessed value of $177,000, picked up $50 worth of compression, and you can see with the tax revenue that the city received was a little over $1,000 in 11-12, but went down to $935,000 in 12-13. And there was a little bit of an increase in 13-14 because real market value went up 1.5%. But then there was all of a sudden a dramatic increase in that tax bill in 14-15 because real market value all of a sudden went up to 197%, or 197,000, and the assessed value was then reset to the max assessed value here. So it ended up being a 5.4% tax increase, but then also compression went down from $48 to $10. Another $38 of compression went away, so this resident's tax bill went up about $100. And you can see the following year it's still a little bit higher than 3% because compression continues to be reduced. And then the final example we have is similar, but in this case compression is still occurring. So in this house, the real market value continued to decline in a much more dramatic way. The maximum assessed value here was just held flat, but this house continued to decrease in value over the forecast period until this year. So they were paying about $973,000, or excuse me, $970 in 12 or 11-12, $880, I believe that is for this year, 9.6% decrease, and then again another 1.9% decrease in 13-14. But then what happened at this point is real market value went up to $189,000, which brought it up to the max assessed value amount, so the assessed value became that as well. This house is still in compression because there's not a spread between real market value and assessed value, so they're still having $50 worth of compression on that house, but you can see their tax bill went up by about $150. And then you'll see also with this one, as compression is reduced through the forecast period, they're going to be receiving higher tax increases for a few years while compression is reduced. So how big an issue is this? Within the residential class, so we're just looking at residential properties that are improved. This is what it looks like at this point. So about 60% of our residents are receiving greater than 3% increase this year. It's all varying different ones, and there's different scenarios for each house, but about 60% are going to be receiving a little bit higher than a 3%. About 37% it's equal to about 3%, and then that remaining about 2.5% is kind of the lower end of that. So then we get into some of our forecast estimates. In January 2014, we were expecting about a 2% real market value growth. So you can see that was the original trajectory. And now what we're anticipating at this point as of November 2014, we're putting in about 4% real market value growth. And you can see what happens with where we think estimated property tax revenue may be going. Now this graph gives us a little bit of an idea of what we've lost. So this line represents about a 3% standard increase over the period that we have here. We were a little bit higher in the early years here, but you can see this dip is essentially where we started to lose tax revenue with compression. And this essentially is the gap that we never were going to recover at this point. This is the loss that we have. But since these values started to go up, we have a new reset to kind of keep modeling forward to work on that 3%. So you can see the line starts to equal that trend again in the next few years here. So then what we do is we can model out all sorts of different scenarios, and this graph's a little bit messy, but if we look at 0 real market value growth, it's the hollow line. We'll take a look at where that would go versus the forecast and what we're expecting. A 2% decline in real market value growth, what that would look like, and then what we're expecting. I think the main takeaway here, since the real market value grew so heavily this year, under any of these circumstances, we are going to be seeing more revenue than we were forecasting originally, and mostly because of compression going down at this point. But, you know, the future is definitely still unpredictable as far as where those values will go based on real market value. And on an upper side growth, if we have a 7% real market value growth, you can see there's a very little change in this, since the laws still tell us we can only increase value by 3%, and the main increases at that point would only be new development and improvements to property. The only real difference in these graphs is compression would go away more quickly in these graphs. So those are the slides that I have for tonight as far as property taxes.
So do you have any questions about that?
Councilor Nanke?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the folks who owe more than 3%, it was a big block. How wide is the spread amongst those inside of that? Say 3 to 5%, 5 to 10. We saw
Yes.
15. Where do they kind of?
I know a lot of them, and I don't remember if I have all the statistics on that, excuse me. I know a lot of them were kind of within that, 3 to 10% range, and then there were some of the 15, and then of course there's some of the really large ones, which are like improvements to property or new property. So you have a little bit of all those folded in there, but it is a larger number. But what I tried to do when I took a quick look at that today as we put that together is, just to see how many out there are. So some are going to be higher than others, yes, but I don't have a specific number for you on that one. But
So we
Yeah,
can
I can definitely get that for you.
How much streaming will happen?
yeah.
Councilor Benars?
Seeing that West Salem is one of our largest, well, it seems to be mostly residential over there, and we have such an impact on the property tax revenue based on the residential units that are out there. You mentioned that there was no compression in West Salem. I heard that. That's why you didn't have anything on the two charts for you showing properties coming out of compression. Can you explain that a little bit more? I mean, certainly West Salem should have had compression, or am I missing something?
No, I'll go back to the slide, and this is how it does definitely get confusing on compression. So when we look at the compression examples, it goes down. It really is a function of the total government rate. So when we add up the government rates in Polk County, they total up to $9.25. So since it's a lower amount than Marion County, which is over 10, it isn't really subject to that $10 cap. When you put that test in, like we do here, if this property was in West Salem, that $2,000 or $1,900 rate would be in place for that, but their rate, since it's only $9, it's less than that. So that's why there's not compression in
So if
Polk
you'd run
County.
the same scenario with House 1 and 2 in West Salem, there would be really no difference between the two.
No, because they wouldn't be having
wouldn't
that
have that
test.
limit.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, David.
Oh, yes, wait a moment.
Sorry, thank you,
Councilor
Madam Mayor.
Foster.
I just want to make one comment. Thank you to the city manager and the staff for, this is very graphic and very
Yes.
most easily understood compression explanation. We got this probably about a year and a half ago, maybe, it seems like, for the first time, and it was when I first really understood it. So
Good.
I like that we had it, and we had it here tonight, and hopefully it's available somehow for people to be able to look at and see.
They punch their own
Yes, we
numbers
can
in or
put it
whatever.
on our website. Yeah. Well, thank you really to David for putting this together. Yeah. We just, I think it was last year, just had the capacity to pull the property tax assessor data into our system so David can start working with it, manipulating it. So now we'll have much better information than we've had before.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I did want to mention too is what we're seeing on the government rate side is also happening on the school district side, just so we're the Measure 5 caps on that as well, since that rate is higher than $5. So that's one reason increases are actually even a little bit higher in some of these properties, because the education part of it too. So it's not just government rates that are affected by this big change in real market value too, but yeah, it's definitely different.
And then when we do the forecast, we'll have our other general fund revenue rates. And as I said, most of them are going to look pretty flat still. But this definitely helps.
I do have a quick question. Maybe David is the right person to ask. Do we have a sense of how many properties are in foreclosure? Are there fewer now than before?
There's fewer. I didn't bring the stats with me. We do track some of the data sources that we can try and find. Zillow's one of them too, that shows the amount of properties that are short sales or in foreclosure, and we are seeing that amount go down. It was a pretty high spike. I wish I could remember the numbers off the top of my head. I don't, but we definitely have seen that. So a lot of those properties that were short sales are moving out of the market. A lot of that's cleared. There's still more that are out there. I know there's a property even near my house that's still, empty at this point. So they're still out there, and a lot of that is driving part of the assessor's calculations on how they look at real market value and things too. But a lot of that is clearing up at this point. So
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
you bet.
All right.
Okay. So we've talked about what we know and what we know about property tax revenue, the things that we don't know yet. We don't know what the PERS lawsuit outcome will be, and if employers lose that lawsuit, we're likely to have to cut more and cut sooner than if we win it. We're hoping to have a decision by about the March or April timeframe. We also don't know, since this is the first time in several years that we've had this kind of property tax increase, we don't know what the delinquency rate will be yet until we experience. We're estimating at about 3.4%, but we'll see as we start receiving property tax revenue what that delinquency rate is. We don't know to what degree property tax revenue increases will continue throughout the 5-year forecast, although several of the staff and I have been to some economic summits, and the economists are saying that they don't see another recession in the next few years coming, but they also didn't see the one that did come. So we don't know. But I was encouraging that they're not predicting another one. And we don't know whether we can keep the growth in expenditures within our anticipated growth in revenue, that although there's a higher growth in property tax overall, it's probably not going to be, the rate of growth in revenue is not going to be the same as the rate of growth in expenditures. Any questions about that? Yes.
Just a real quick one on the delinquencies. You mentioned 3%. The delinquencies doesn't mean the money's not going to come in. It's just not going to come in when it's supposed to on this particular year.
Well,
it gets added to the bill for that particular piece of property, does it not?
Right, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's delayed.
It's
so
delayed
it's
to come in.
what happens with second year and third year property tax revenue.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So the first thing I thought we could do, and again in our low-tech presentation, you can see the side to my right on budget guidelines. Peter had such good success with this, with the third bridge, that we've taken back to doing flip charts again. So, yes. So our budget guidelines, we'd like to take a minute to look at that and see if you still agree with those guidelines. One is we're going to provide the services most closely directed toward the result areas, which are a safe community, a livable community, vibrant economy, and good governance, so that if we have to cut, the ones that we're going to protect the most closely are the ones that are related, directed toward those result areas, that will comply with the city's financial policies and Oregon budget law, that we want to maintain, and this time we improve the city's bond credit rating, that we want to fund our bond and contractual commitments and regulatory requirements, and maintain a working capital of about 18 million for the first year of the forecast, and I'm changing this a little bit to recommend to you, and not drop below 12 million by the end of the third year of the forecast. And I'll tell you, last year, as you know, we get most of our revenue for the general fund during the time we receive property tax revenue for the first few months, or about this time of year, October, November, December, a little bit in January. And so most of our revenue comes in, and we start the year on July 1st, but then we don't start getting the most of our revenue until about November of that next year. The year before last, we had to only, we spent all of our general fund revenue, but before that, every year. And last year, we still had a little over 100,000 left as we started receiving our new revenue. This year, it was about 300,000. So I think we're managing pretty well with being able to carry enough beginning fund capital, beginning working capital, that we make it all the way through the year until we start receiving our revenue again. And the thing that really helps with, if we're having to borrow 800,000 or 900,000 from other funds, and then we get our general fund revenue, we have to pay back that 800,000 or 900,000. So we're kind of starting in a hole. So one of my goals, and as we've talked about over the years, has been to work ourselves out of that system so we have enough money to carry through with all of our expenditures. And I think if we maintain a working capital of about 18 million for the first year of the forecast and not drop below 12 million, instead of before I was saying 10 million because I wasn't sure we could reach 12 million, but I think 12 million is a better number by the end of the third year. And then we can always adjust, every year we make adjustments. So is there anything there you would like to change or add or take away?
Councillor Clausen.
So a quick question, to get from the beginning of the fiscal year till our bulk of our revenue is in, what is that number? Did you say that?
Well, this year we had beginning working capital of about 21 million. And so that, with our projected revenue, was able to carry through until we start getting more revenue with about 300,000 to the good.
Oh,
So it
okay.
really just depends on what the revenue is that we receive every year. So I can't tell you exactly right now how much money it's going to take. And we're starting this year with about the same. We were able to keep our expenditures in line with revenue last fiscal year through June 30th, which again, as you know, is always a goal of ours. We were able to do that again, so we'll be starting with about the same beginning working capital this year.
Okay.
Okay.
Councillor Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't understand why, how you explain that, why it would go down in future years. Why would it, if you need 18 million in the first year, what makes it go down to 12?
What makes it go down is if we have to eat into our beginning working capital because the revenue, the annual revenue, doesn't meet our annual expenditure requirements. So as we've gone through the recession, we've anticipated that there are going to be some years where we think we're likely, as we put the budget together, we're likely to have to eat into our beginning working capital. And we put the forecast and the budget together with that in mind. But then based on council's direction, we manage the operations of the city to try to keep our expenditures in line with our revenue. Because at this point, as I said, right now we're estimating what's going to happen by July of 2016, and a lot of things change between now and that much time. So we've known from our experience with the way that we forecast that we're able to make enough adjustments as we go that if we say we'll be at 12 million by the end of the third year, by the time we get there, we can make enough changes so we don't go that far down. It's a little easier to see this when you look at the forecast, and we don't have that done yet, but
we purposely built it up knowing that
we did.
we would have to have some extra money in the out years as we saw that cliff was coming at us. So we purposely built the ending or beginning fund balance, whichever one you want to call it.
Councilor Benars?
Well, on that same line, we kept saying the proverbial cliff is coming, but where is that? Because every time it came up, there was that cliff, but we haven't seen the edge of it yet.
Well, that's because we're planning out for
Right.
the 3 years, so we make sure we don't see the edge. I always show you in the financial forecast, Schedule A, if we don't do anything to fix our structural deficit, what happens? And definitely there's a cliff there within sometimes 2 years, and definitely by the 3rd year where we're negative, which we can't do under budget law. And then I show you Schedule B, that if we manage this and what it's been in the past and cut as much as we need to cut, and are very careful about the services we provide and our expenditures, we try to stay positive by the end of the 3rd year so we never fall off the cliff.
Well, I made that comment mainly because we have 4 new individuals coming on at council, and they're here tonight and watching in.
Yes.
And this is the conversation I've had or heard for the last couple of years.
Yeah. We could fall off the cliff if we didn't manage it, but none of us would be doing our jobs. Okay. Okay, so are there things you would like to change with the budget guideline?
Councilor Nanki?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In light of that last conversation and cutting to, catch a Schedule B or C, whichever we go for, just looking at it from a pure business standpoint, and we tend to separate government and, the private sector in that way, but, most companies have to keep reducing their price, and they control that inside. We tend to have a captured clientele, if you want to call it that way. So just wanting to make sure we're looking at it from that kind of a model as well. How do we improve our service and reduce our internal price as well? And we talked about that just a couple of moments ago on cutting, but are we cutting in the right places based on the service and what we actually want to deliver to our customers per se?
That's right, and that's part of that first bullet. So we've tried to protect the services that are most directly related to safety and livability, parks and police and economic development and the result areas that we're trying to achieve. So we've tried to keep those most basic service, but as you know, we've cut, I think, about 90-some positions over the last 5 years, and we've cut some departments and closed fire stations and cut other programs to try to keep balancing that. So those are the decisions that'll be before council as you look at next year's budget.
And my issue kind of with that is that our customer has to pay more every year for our product. Be it through their property taxes or rate increases or fee increases as well. And so trying to drive that efficiency in to minimize that cost increase.
Right. And for the public who's watching or for other people in the audience, there's a difference between enterprise funds, so water and sewer, where it really is you get this service, it costs this much to deliver that service and that capacity in the instance of water and sewer. And we have these classes of customers, and we go through a rate study, and so this is what your rate is to deliver that amount of money for the capacity, the service, and the ability to maintain. In the general fund, I think the really interesting thing about that people don't often appreciate is that the work doesn't go down. So the workload and the number of police calls and the number of cases that go to municipal court and the number of fires have nothing to do with our revenue. So we're going to get property tax based on, certain state mandated requirements. That's what the revenue is going to be, or that's what the franchise fee is going to be, or what state shared revenue is that the state decides to give us. Has nothing to do with what our workload is or what our requirements are. And that's what makes it tricky for the general fund of how we continue to deliver that higher level of workload with what has been less money over the last few years.
If I can follow on that, and just the way the systems, even with healthcare, it's like,
Right.
well, it's cheaper if I don't have it, and then I'll just call Salem fire department to come pick me up and take me to the emergency room if I have a problem.
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
don't get reimbursed to the full extent of that either. So
No. It's very
trying to find the
difficult.
similarities to at least drive improvement internal
Right,
as
and
well.
we look constantly, and we brought some examples back to council in previous years, and we'll do that again. Our staff is wonderful about looking at less expensive ways to do things. You know, we've, over the last few years, the IT savings that we've had, about $500,000 a year for a few years, and every department works on how can we do this more efficiently and at less cost. So, and we will definitely continue to do that. So the budget guidelines are,
Councilor
not sure?
Norris?
I'm sitting here looking at the different bullet points, and certainly bullet points 2, 3, 4, even 5, because you're trying to maintain that ending fund balance. The first one, the first bullet point, provide services most closely directed towards the result areas. What I was thinking in my mind, because it's not really part of the budget process, but it's goal setting for the city. Where do we want to see the priorities? And that's a whole other conversation we haven't had now for a while, but we need to, as a council, need to come through and figure out what are our priorities, basically. So we know where we're setting those, providing those services.
right.
And then I think we've also had that conversation of, can we afford all the services that we want? And then what happens if we have to cut them? But so I guess from my point of view, goal setting would be a nice thing to, and it's not part of the budget guideline, but it is definitely an influence on what's going on up there.
It definitely is, and we provide reports to you on a quarterly basis of where we are on council goals. And I think we're hoping that we'll be able to do a goal session in February. So that,
Well, I'd
or
like
March?
to do it a little earlier than that.
Oh,
We
in
don't have it on
January?
the calendar yet.
Okay.
Thank you,
We've got to
yes.
get our new counselors on board. We normally do it in January, February, and last year as a council, we sort of agreed that rather than hold formal goal setting, we simply reaffirmed the goals that we had set the previous year and directed staff to do that. But this year, certainly with the new counselors coming on board, it's time to certainly sit down and do some really serious goal setting. So January, February, definitely. And then those goals need to be held against the budget as we're crafting the budget and going through and making any decisions that we're making with that. It has to go hand in hand. Councilor Clausen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To answer the city manager's question, I definitely like the overarching goals that are laid out up here, which is the big picture of basically go into it with a big picture perspective of what's going to happen to the bottom line for us looking out. I definitely like our 5-year budgeting plan and looking at that third year as kind of our bottom line. I definitely like the adjustment to the final bullet point of the $12 million by the end of the third year. I think it's a conservative thing for right now, and I think in out years, as we get a little bit further out, if our income, if our tax revenue starts to steady out at a better positive rate, is probably the time to really start looking at continued services, as Councilor Rogers mentioned, one-time projects versus continued services.
Right.
Probably not this year, not for the continued services, but maybe in the next year if things look like they're being steady. So the $12 million at the third year is going to assist us in being
Right.
able to bring those back earlier if that's possible. So I like this. I support what we have here as a big picture, and I do support the idea of council with the new counselors getting together as early as possible to adjust council goals, relook at it again, and kind of refine this list on the left side of the result areas of what does that actually mean for
Right.
detail.
Yeah, and we gave you in your packet the more detailed explanation of what the result areas are from the work that council's done before. So that may be something you want to just keep and refer to as we go into council goals and think about whether there's anything you'd like to change there. In this draft, we combined healthy environment and livable community into one category because they seem kind of one and the same. So we also gave you in your packet a list of all of the general fund program areas, how many employees, that's FTE, full-time equivalent employees, are in each area, and what the cost is in the current budget for you to be thinking about I would, unless you have different direction for me, I would give the direction to the department directors to, as they start putting together their first budget recommendations, to put it together based on current service levels, unless you feel now that there's something that we ought to reduce. Maybe before we start talking about adding, is there anything we're doing now that you don't think we should continue to do?
Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's not what you shouldn't do. It's some areas of emphasis, I guess, that would probably mean either moving it around a little bit or doing some and it's in the vibrant economy area. It feels like we're in an opportunity, just given your forecast, that I would like to understand how much goes into that result area compared to other areas, because it clearly has an impact over time on the city's bottom line. And understanding we're looking a lot at the urban renewal areas.
Right.
I'm very interested in our investment in SEDCOR as to whether we're underfunding really for the amount of work we really ought to have going on, or other areas like that, to make sure we're really poised at the end of this. And I don't think it's a huge expenditure, but I want to kind of understand, because it's such an important part of the result areas, how much is going in there, and should it be adjusted upward? Should we be moving money around in order to take care or to take advantage of opportunities?
Okay, thank you.
I think what I would like to see, actually, as we list our areas, result areas, I'd really like to see vibrant economy as the #1. And I'm really going to be pushing the council for that as we start our goal sessions in January. And it also, we have been talking, thank you for mentioning that, Councillor Bennett, how much work we've been doing recently with our urban renewal areas. And it was occurring to me a couple days ago, I was thinking about budgeting and the urban renewal areas, and what is it that the urban renewal advisory boards need to hear from us, which they do, and ask, and we properly should be giving them direction. I'd like to see their work become more results-oriented along those lines of increasing the value of the properties within those districts and increasing the numbers of jobs and the revenue that's generated within those districts. And I think if we, as a community, both the city council and our urban renewal boards, begin to focus more clearly and more specifically on those two things, property values and jobs, so many of these other things will come to fruition, because we'll have the money, because there'll be a stronger economy, there'll be a stronger revenue base, and then we're going to be able to do more things towards safety and vibrancy and the other quality of life issues within the city. Yes, Councillor Bennett?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Madam Mayor, and I wonder if one of the things we couldn't have during the budget discussion, particularly as we deal with the Urban Renewal Agency or economic development outside of the urban renewal agencies, is some sort of metric or benchmark that tells us kind of what's going on there in those kinds of terms that talk about jobs or property development. So we have an understanding, kind of what's going on, what do the plans look like, what do we see in the next year.
Right.
I think it informs the advisory committees of our expectations, as well as setting for ourselves some expectations. And we have a couple that really have some tremendous opportunity right now that I'm going to be very curious about.
Good.
Yeah,
We'll
I
do
think
that.
so. And with regard to the urban renewal areas, of course, every one of them has a plan. And so I'm not saying that we would be throwing out the plan. We can't do that, and we shouldn't. But I do think that we need to look at those plans and then say back to the urban renewal advisory boards, emphasize certain areas of the plan so that we do have the increase in property value, we do have the increase in jobs, and hold those items as priorities as all elements of the plan are
Right.
being addressed and worked. Because even within those boards, setting priorities and setting goals should be a healthy part of the work that they do.
Yes.
We can
Okay.
ask for that. I think Councillor Bernard, you had a comment?
A short one here. Madam Mayor, I absolutely 100% agree. I think a vibrant economy is going to bring, when we talk about quality of life isn't just having a wonderful city with, paved roads and everything else. It also includes feeding yourself and having a job so you can do that, a roof over your head if that job can provide for that. And that all comes from a vibrant community, vibrant economy, rather. And such a fact that as a high priority to me, I'd love to see it moved up the list to the top, because it really does become more important, as I see it as the first item on the list. Yes.
I think so. I think that almost 4 years ago, when we sat down and did our first budgeting goal setting, when I came on council, jobs was number one. And I don't ever want to see that drop down to, a different position. Councillor Nanki?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, it funds the balance of it all. Kind of in that line, and I suppose it would fall more under the good governance portion and maintaining fiscal sustainability. I know several of the last budget committee final meetings, whatever, we talk about outsourcing and subcontracting and focusing on, I think it's what we do best, and let someone else who does these other things best do those things.
Absolutely.
And I know the street sweepers always comes up. I think I bring up security and custodial a lot. I didn't know what else is out there. If we look to say, what is our target area? Where do we really want to be? And what other private sources are out there that can do these things, which actually helps private sector, and whether or not it's just moving pieces or things or bodies from one side to another. But as we keep looking at that cliff and modifying how we act, eventually we'll have to get to some of those possibly. So it'd just be nice to understand the spectrum and
Right, and
As we look
we
forward.
contract out a lot.
I know.
We do. And we can give you that information for the council goal session, just so you can see that again. As you know, there are some state requirements on how you can contract out and what you can contract out in terms of current services, and so we look for those opportunities. But we can bring back here some other areas
And I would
maybe
like
that we should look
to
at.
know more
More
on
about
what the
that.
restrictions
Okay.
are as well, and what we
Okay.
can and can't do and why.
Okay.
I think that's a good idea. Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to follow up also on comments from Councilors Bernards and Rogers to help emphasize, I think, the importance of investment in some of the infrastructure that's really in pretty tough
Right.
shape.
Right.
And the need to, whether it's set up a kind of an ongoing fund or to look at how we're allocating current funds onto the streets and sidewalks. I'm particularly concerned about the sidewalks, and sort of following up on Councilor Rogers' one-time investment. The nice thing about sidewalks in this town, under the current rules of the game, if they're not going to change, is they're always a one-time investment when you improve a sidewalk, because it reverts.
Right.
And so I tend to look at it as one of those tremendous opportunities, looking into out years. We're behind, obviously, seriously behind. But that as we can see through, I'm particularly interested in franchise fees, and including the new franchise additions we've had, seeing those funds dedicated to, particularly, I'm looking right now at sidewalks, because I think they do represent really an opportunity to begin to kind of decrease our liability out there, not our liability, trip and fall liability, just the liability to the community. And every time we fix one of those panels, we never have to fix it again. it moves to again, because
Property
it
owner.
reverts. And I think it
Yeah.
fits what Councilor Rogers is talking about in terms of one-time money being used for that kind of one-time purpose. I'd like to see it set up in such a way that it actually has a continuity to it over time, rather than, just $400,000 this year, but not next year, but the year after. I'd like to see it have continuity, much like a street fund of some kind that, although streets have their own long-term obligation.
Right.
Sidewalks don't, and I really
No,
would like to see
no.
us get focused on those.
Is, one of the things about the policy City Council has now and has had for several years about how sidewalks will be repaired and then turned back, we probably won't ever have enough money to catch up with what that obligation is going to be. Is it something that council would like to maybe explore that policy again? Or do you want to just keep trying to find the money?
I'd like to.
Councilor Rogers
will be
would not
gone,
like
and
to
no
do
one
that
will
again.
take it. No one will bring it forward but Rogers. But I do think that it's a huge problem.
It is.
It is finite, though. We just don't know where the end is, but we know it's there under the current policy. What we don't have is any kind of we have some investment going on through streets and bridges and through sort of an emergency
Right.
response. But we need to start, and we need to get used to to me, this is just my opinion, obviously, but some sort of fund that starts, and it can start as small as you want. But it's a beginning.
something regular.
Because it absolutely has an end. If we try to take the whole thing on, you're right. I mean, we're going to have to talk someday about a bond or
Right.
some other.
Yeah,
But,
to really make good progress.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we've seen progress.
We have. We
And
have.
certainly, I know in the neighborhoods I represent, there's been some progress, but you go one street away,
Yeah.
and the sidewalks are literally crumbling. And so I really am trying to figure out how can we really look our constituents in the eye and say, no, we have a plan. It's not fully realized fiscally, but it is fully realized as a matter of policy,
Okay.
and we're trying to get there.
Okay.
I think one thing that I would like to see, and maybe this is probably more goal-setting discussion, but we have our capital improvement projects
Right.
list.
Yes.
And sometimes I feel like we put things on the capital improvement project list, and then we sort of put it in the back room and shut the door. I mean, I know we keep working away on it, but I worry about some of those things on the capital improvement list that may be deteriorating further and may need more attention than we, council, stay aware of. And I'm very, very concerned about our city shops and the property there. And at some point, we're really going to have to come to grips with the needs for the buildings and some of the capital equipment that goes into those buildings that really helps people who are doing their jobs day in and day out, and in the bad weather,
Right.
more so than even in the good weather. And I'm not sure how we're going to really ever
Right,
approach
it's going
that
to
unless
take
we
a
start to really
bond
think
measure.
about
It will
Mhm.
take a bond measure because it would be primarily, some water and sewer money and then primarily general fund money for parks and fleet and some of the other services out there. We had, before the recession started, we had planned and put aside some money to do a water and sewer building, but then when our underwriters lost their credit rating, we had to move several $1 million over in reserves to meet our bond covenants. So we weren't able to do that building, and now, as you know, we're trying to do water and sewer capital improvements pay as you go for several years until we're out of the debt we're carrying for the wastewater treatment plant. So there's not an opportunity, I think, to do that building for several years. Peter and I talked about it the other day, and we think it's definitely more than 5 years out, and probably considerably longer. In terms of the general fund services, as you know, that we have the Blue Ribbon Task Force right now looking at the police facility, which council's considered to be the primary, the first area that needs to be addressed. But definitely, you know, where those other staff are and what's at our 25th Street shops area would be something that council might want to consider for a future bond measure. Yeah, because we can't do it out of operating money.
No, I know we can't.
Yeah.
I know we can't.
Okay.
I just always like to have a chance to remind
I
and
agree.
bring it up. And-
Yes,
and,
yes.
Okay, Councilor Rogers?
Thank you, Mayor. I remember studying the shops a long time ago and seeing some pretty pictures, and we talked about what our bond rating might be. And I remember coming on council at the beginning. It seems like or maybe just before I was on council, this is like 12 years ago now, we had like a $2.40 bond anticipated. We thought that's what we could get out of the community. I'm curious what that is today on one side of the question. It's probably less than $1.
Do you know, Kelly, do you want to come to or in the microphone?
I think we're at about $1.10.
Yeah, so anyway, that's, you know, back then we'd still have $1 to play with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, following, I would hope that you come back, the staff comes back with, especially from Public Works, talking about sidewalks or talking about the slurry, and hopefully come back with, I don't want to say a bigger request, but a reasonable request of moving us forward in those areas. And there's some other areas too, but you know, I think slurry, I don't think we've put money in slurry either for a while, and I think we need to really keep that in our utmost mind.
Okay.
I never want to do a sidewalk committee again, never.
Councilor Clausen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, to the manager's question earlier about maintaining current levels versus maybe decreasing or increasing, you know, until we get the full presentation here in January, my gut feel would be planning towards maintaining current levels.
Okay.
And what I'm thinking about along those lines are, if budgeting comes back and things are looking good, if there's extra money that is in the budget that could go to one time or whatever, it might be a good way for policy or for the budget committee to go forward to establish something up front that, if there was a slush fund, so to say, to put guidelines on what might go into that slush fund. So what might come out of that. So some of these things, maybe a sidewalk allowance or a street maintenance allowance for a year, you know, a list of projects. You know, a couple ideas would be putting a parameter, it's a one-time expenditure only type fund. So, and then another parameter might be focusing on future returns, so projects that provide a future savings, so keeping a street 20 years longer instead of 10 years longer, or
We
things
have
along those
some
lines.
of those suggested criteria for you to look at, because I think, I mean, what a wonderful place to finally be in, that we can start talking, if we can add something back, where would we want to start? You know, is it with maintaining our buildings, you know, that we know the library needs a new roof and other ones do. I guess Kelly's going to put it up right now so we can talk about that a little better, or would it be something else? So we thought just kind of brainstorming. The second priority might be recommended criteria for priorities and one-time resources. So might we want to increase grants, like the SPIF grants for $60,000 a year? We get incredible donations from our community. If that were $100,000, could we move our parks forward faster? Or do things that are very low cost, like maybe a couple of dog parks. It really doesn't cost much to put a fence and a couple of picnic tables and some trash and some maintenance, but they don't cost much, and maybe that's something that the community could really benefit from. Or extend the asset useful life, roofs and other, we know we have a number of problems with this building. Increase efficiency. So we want to put money toward things that are going to help us be more efficient, and as Councilor Nanke said, reduce our costs over time. We could invest in things like maybe dark fiber, that if we invested in some of that, we would have longer term operation savings. As we made that front investment. And then grant matches, might we want to set aside some money so that we can apply for more grants and we have the 10% match or whatever it takes? Do we want to generate longer term revenue, create a building maintenance reserve? I think all of those are opportunities, and it would be very helpful to hear from council and then maybe later the full budget committee about if we were going to do one-time funding, this is what our priority would be.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was headed, just to provide a little bit of guidelines on what goes into that, because staff is, I know you guys have tons of project ideas bouncing around in your heads about what could we do, and just so what would be the priorities. My other thought, if I could, Mayor, under well-planned community, one thing, or under livable communities, part of that is a well-planned community, and I definitely don't want to lose sight of stormwater issues that we have in the south side of Salem. And I know that we've begun some studies and kept moving those forwards. And as Councilor Bennett mentioned, we're poised for good things here as far as economic development. Economic development is also going to mean people need places to live, and our places deliver in South Salem and West Salem for the most part. So we need to not lose sight of, I think we're starting those studies at a good time, so that hopefully if things really start kicking off, which they already are, I'm seeing a lot of dirt turning out in South Salem right now. And the earlier we get those studies done, the earlier we can make decisions on stormwater impacts of South Salem, because the only areas to develop now in South Salem are uphill of places that are already developed. So that means all that water's flowing downhill. So we need to make sure we really clearly understand the whole watershed out there. So I don't want to lose sight of that.
Good point. Councilor Bennett and then Councilor Nanke.
One other, as you look at service levels discussion, continued general fund services at current level, I hope that in that, inside of that is where we have current programs that are under person, And I'm looking at the specific one that hits me is the downtown patrol team being understaffed, and whether or not that represents, if current service level can mean what it ought to be rather than what it is. I worry that one, because of its hours, because of the number of officers, it appears to me to be at least a couple short, that really we aren't providing kind of our current, you know what
I do. Well, let me tell you how I would translate that. And what I think current service level means is that we're providing the level of service we're providing now. Where the workload has gone up, though, and we know in municipal court they're dealing with a higher workload, planning with more economic activity, we have a higher workload. The same in urban development and many places in the city, that we try to keep up with that to the extent we can. Now, we don't want to add ongoing costs next year, I think, but if there were some one-time investments we could make to help people do that, that we look at that first maybe. But there may be a few additional positions that you want to add next year.
I appreciate you bringing up the municipal court. I'm really interested in that just myself, and we rarely see any change there in the budget. But whether or not, as you look at that budget, we can look at, I know the judge is looking at community courts, that kind of changed service. I don't know if it changes the cost or the current service. I assume it probably changes the cost just because we've so
Well, we're still
underfunded.
evaluating that.
Yeah. I think that's just a really interesting area to be able to provide convenience as well as surer, swifter justice for your traffic ticket than you're currently getting.
Right. Okay, good, good. Okay.
I think one of the things that I'd like to see in the budgeting also is as you look at each department, looking ahead for innovation and improvements that we need to make in our departments because of new technology, because of the more rapid communication that we are hearing from the public that they really desire. And so as we maintain service levels, I think what we have to look at is, are some of these service levels or some of these activities compatible with 2014, 15, 2015, 16, 16, 17? Are we keeping up in terms of what is going on in society, or are we going to sort of lapse to doing it the same way year after year because that's what we feel that we can afford?
Right.
So we may need to make adjustments.
I agree, and our IT department has been doing a technology strategic plan for the departments, and there are definitely many more things we could be doing with better technology and providing better service, and I think that's what you mean, and so we'll look at what we can do there.
It is. And, I've been thinking also about the fact that, a lot of times we talk about the negotiating that's going on in the unions, and we look at our salary ranges, and we look at our non-represented employees. And the other thing that we have to remember is that one of the things that really makes people want to work in a certain environment is knowing that not only are they challenged, but do they have the tools and the resources so that they can reach up to a higher level, and so that their work is meaningful to them and their future is meaningful here. And I think we've done a good job here with not having high turnover, but I think that we have to be thinking even ahead in that regard so that we sort of provide not only salaries and benefits, but the working environment that says to people, well, I really want to be at the City of Salem, and I want to do a great job here because this is a place where I can do that work.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Nanke.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And actually, to tie off on several pieces, I think most importantly was the city manager's comment on dark fiber. You want to drive a vibrant economy, stick a fiber ring inside of the City of Salem, which will improve everybody's efficiency throughout the city, as well as the city's own employees, and draw in big businesses that basically not only want but need those kind of speeds to operate. That's a great use of one-time money, but there's so much fiber running all over. I think we've done some mapping to see where it is, but looking at forming a partnership, and we know we've had some challenges inside of our current system, and where that's going right now, and we'll see how that one plays out. I think we just keep extending for years and years. Second to that, talking about just infrastructure in general, I think we have to be cognizant of that, as well as the livability that people see today. But if we don't take care of those things that are going to fail, the cost to them tomorrow will take away all that happy livability. So, and kind of just in that line with prices so low on petroleum right now, can we pre-buy asphalt? Okay.
Mark, do you want to
make a big pile of it somewhere, and then we'll just heat her back up? And
I don't know how long we can keep it.
I know.
Mark Bechtel, Parks and Transportation Services Manager. Counselor, if I could have a giant asphalt plant to my own self, I'd love it. But no, we are at the mercy of the spot market for asphalt, and really we buy our asphalt by bid from the 3 companies that make it here in town, and the price of asphalt oil is completely independent of the price of retail fuel. As refineries become more efficient around the world, and they refine and distill out more of the high-end fuels like diesel and gasoline and kerosene, there's less asphalt oil remaining at the bottom of the barrel. So actually, regardless of what you pay for gasoline, asphalt oil is getting more expensive.
Crap.
So,
That's a technical term.
Yes,
It's kind of like alligator and pavement.
we learned that one the other day, didn't we? Right. One of the things I've wondered also with our budgeting is where we might have opportunities to collaborate with our adjacent community, our adjacent governments, either with the city of Kaiser, and I know we do a lot of that, and I'm really proud of our city that departments work so well across the city lines, and also with Marion County, Polk County,
Right.
and Salem Kaiser School District. Opportunities either for joint purchasing or maybe for projects done in both, talking about connectivity and fiber, and
Right.
maybe there's some opportunities
Right, we are
out there.
looking at that. Yeah, good.
And we are changing a lot of our technology in the 911 communications.
We're,
I'm not knowledgeable enough to remember all of the
yeah.
terminology.
It's the, well, we replaced the CAD system, and right now we're in the process of the procurement process for the 800 megahertz project that will give us interoperability. I don't think we've opened those bids yet. So we have $7 or $8 million, something like that, to use. We're hoping the bids don't come in much higher than that. So we'll have to see how they come in and what we can afford. But we are working on going forward with that project to the extent we can afford it
Good.
right now.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Benars?
There was a priority there that I don't see that should be there, and that was the leveraging of funds. I find that no matter which projects, we are always going for different pots of money. A classic example is, for example, the Kubler expansion, where it wasn't just simply bond money or funds that came from the city, but there were multiple pots that we found. And I remember this last year from the budget, that we gave some priority to those where a few dollars from us was leveraged and did a lot of work because there were other sources out there. One time maybe sources, or one specific use source, but we leveraged those dollars.
That is missing from there. That we'll add that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Good catch. Okay. Other questions, other thoughts on this section of the discussion? All right. What's next on your page?
Well, the next thing is, I don't know whether now or you want to wait until the first part of next year, if you want to say what you think those priorities should be.
Councilor Nanke?
And I think that's important for goal setting and early as possible in January. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it could be, so help me, and now it's goal setting time.
I'll go for that. I'll go for that. Hey, all right.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So then,
Otherwise, we're driving
Yeah.
something for someone else need. If we follow that logic that you can't hold another future council hostage to something, and we're a month and a half away from that day,
right.
I think would be disingenuous to
Okay. Good.
those who are going to be joining us here in 6 weeks.
Right, right.
Good. So the next thing is diversifying revenue. And as you know, you've been talking about this through the year. But because many of our general fund revenue sources are expected to be flat or decline, and property tax still, even as it goes up, isn't going to go up enough to cover all of police and fire still. So we still have that issue, and that's not any different from us than it is for most cities. That's generally the case. So we've always talked about one of our goals would be to, when there are opportunities for increased revenue, to provide the services that council set as priorities that we ought to look for those or bring them to council. The franchise fee on the water and sewer rates was one that council passed a few weeks ago. And that will bring them some additional money to address some of these needs that we've talked about. Is that still a priority to council? Do you still want us to continue to look at revenue sources when those are possible? Or you've asked us to keep fees current with cost of living indexes, and I want to ensure that that's still part of what your direction is.
Councillor Bennett, and then Councillor Nanke, and then Councillor Benars.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think as long as we have pretty constant contact about why don't you offer this, I mean, really, we could really offer full-blown city government just off our weekly email and requests there, that we really owe it to people to look at the revenue possibilities and then let them figure out if they want to pay for what the cost of some of the stuff that's asked for. During the budgeting, we get to work with the available money and reprioritize, figure out different ways of spending it. But the requests that I get are substantial. They are, in some cases, not wildly expensive, but they're outside our budget possibilities every year. So I'd like to at least know what the possibilities look like, and then let the council and the community take a look at them and see whether or not they can see the, the advisability of the value added from those added revenues.
Councillor Nanke?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And, with our recent discussions on water sewer rates, the franchise fees on the solid waste haulers, their increase, we had where all the governing regional folks would meet to figure out who's going out for a bond win and what have you. It would be nice to have kind of that map so we know when other people are going to be looking at raising something or not, to level that out, because especially in this one, even though we're starting to see some uptick in people coming out of compression, that means that several of them are going to be forking out a lot more money this year. And then it always gets back to those fixed incomes, because that's not a sustainable system. And so we need to be really cognizant of how we have people saying, I need this, I need this, I need this, and a growing number of the community saying, I can't afford anything more, and so I'm going to have to cut something at home so that you can do this for those people, because I don't use that, because I can't get there. And that's a really hard thing, but if we could see a bigger picture and say, okay, and we'll try to, look for opportunities here. Most of the ones we could do whenever. The franchise fee on the waste haulers, that could have been next year, year after, 4 years down. And at least identify those kind of things and
Good. Yeah, we'll try to
look at how we flatten that out across.
Together.
Okay. So, Councillor Benars?
Thank you. I had actually several little comments. There's a difficult discussion here, moving from a property tax-based system to a fee-based system, and so much because we're so limited with the property taxes. Thinking back to earlier this evening when we had these nice graphs that had been put together, David had done for us, that showed, we were hurting as a public sector portion for a period of time. Continue to, but we were hurting for that period of time. But it pales compared to the pain that the public people out in the private sector were hurting during that same period of time. I mean, everybody was in pain. Having said that, I think we need to continue to look at fees as well as other ways to raise revenues. But I also think that we should keep our eyes on and make it a priority to grow the pie. I've mentioned this before. If we have more properties on the market, if we have more homes paying property taxes, more businesses paying property taxes, those are the things that are going to help us in the longer run, I think, even greater, and add to the quality of life to our community. The last thing I wanted to comment was, as we look at fees are generally decided. We talked, I think Councillor Bennett had mentioned, the people will decide, but fees are generally decided by policymakers, whereas tax increases are decided usually by a vote. And as policymakers sitting in this room, we're speaking for the whole community. I just caution, I just know that people got fed up along the way, and they did the Measure 47, 49, Measure 5, and so forth, and along the way, different things have happened, and it's likely to happen the same way with fees over a long period of time, because people are going to say, I'm feed to death. And just feed to death. So I'm just a little caution there,
Yeah, and I want to assure the council that we're very cognizant of the community that we live within, and that we know there are a lot of people in this community who are at or below the poverty line. And so even saying, your direction to us to look at revenue where you can or fees where you can, we're careful about that because we understand these same issues as you do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that. It really is important to remember that we are almost often the second largest city, sometimes the third largest city in Oregon. But we are also a city with quite a large number of people who are living below the poverty level, and a large number of children living in poverty. And so I'm cognizant that we need to always be aware of that. But we do have, and I'm very proud to be in a city where our public works director thinks of those things when we're looking at our fee structures and looking at our costs for water and sewer and all of the other related things that we bill people for. And we do have programs that are available, and I think that's always important to keep those. I was cognizant at a recent last year's Oregon Mayors Association conference that there are many, many cities in the state that actually have a lot more fees than we do. And as I talked with mayors from across the state, listening to their justification and their reasons for really using fees more in their cities than I think we have thought about right here. And I'd like to kind of see an analysis maybe of, not because I want to say, well, everybody else does it, so we'll do it too, but just to see how other communities are really making those decisions.
Good, we can do that.
Yes, Councilor Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. I talked to the city manager about this, and I think there's information coming, but I think we really need to look at our exempt property in our city. Property goes on exempt rolls in this city, and we have no control of it. The county okays it. As for nonprofits, I'm not picking on any one person. It's nonprofits, it's schools, it's state buildings, it's county, it's us, churches, everybody. And yet, and it's even urban renewal to a certain extent. And so all these folks are not paying into the fund, but yet they're receiving the services. And it seems to me that we should be able, as a city, come with some form of a fee that we collect some of this non-exempt money for services, for fire maybe, or for police at some level. I don't know what that should be. I'm just throwing it out. But it's just for me, it's a crying shame that we have exempt properties. We have no control over who gets to be it, but yet we still have to provide the service. And so I would hope that we can come up with something on those lines in the future, in the near future.
I agree. I agree to that. Okay.
That's all we had tonight, unless you have other things you wanted to cover, other direction you want to give us, or?
I don't think of others. I think we've covered quite a bit. Councilor Clausen?
Just one comment, I guess. Thank you for putting this on, and thank you to staff for being here and putting it on, and thank you to the Budget Committee members who are here, because I think this is the kind of thing that really gets the budget process on its feet and rolling as we roll into January and February, and luckily I'm not going to be here for it, but it's a good thing for the process as a whole, that's for sure.
Good, thank you.
That's right.
I feel your pain.
All right.
Okay, this has been very helpful to us, thank you.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we are adjourned.